Like I said before, Australia is gone. And in the most recent news coming out of the government is basically that the Victorian government is going to create what they refer to as quarantine hubs. Basically, what that means is internment camps. You read it, you can read it in its length. This is according to the victorian.gov.au, right? And so you can see alternative quarantine accommodation hubs. It says the business case identified as preferred as C-19 quarantine is an important feature of our public health response to the C-19, and this new purpose-built hub will be designed and built with the primary purpose of ensuring the safety of our communities. That's basically what the Nazis told the Jews and told the German people, that we're doing all of this. It's for your safety. It's for your health, right? Because these people over here, they're spreading disease. Ironically, Hitler did the exact same thing. Hitler sat there and he told Jewish people were responsible for spreading disease. And as a result, even in that time, go look it up. You can go look, even during the early 1900 plague, they were out there. We need to get stuff in arms to people. And then years later, they're like, oh, all right. Century later, they were like, oh yeah, they were wrong, and this is what killed them. Anyways, you can read this in its entirety. Of course, all links to everything being discussed will be left down in the description box. Now, some people who have rushed out to take it, who have drank the Kool-Aid, they're like, the statement "misery loves company," and some people are just tired. They're thinking, well, if we all just get in line, well, then we're going to go back to normal. And that is definitely not the case, to the point where you even have, right, it says, let them die. Washington State middle school teacher says of the unvaccinated. Soon, if this keeps going on, you're going to get a knock on the door, and it's going to be some individuals in uniform asking if you've got any unvaccinated under the stairs. You hiding anybody down there? Are they going to be down there with their flashlights? You got anybody under the staircase? You got any unvaccinated down there? And this is basically, unfortunately, where we're at. She goes on to say, she said, I'm ready to say, let them die. You make the choice to not get the shot for any reason other than a doctor's note. You should not be allowed healthcare. I'd be like, shoot, I'm okay. I'll treat myself. Some of the shit that I've seen in the hospitals, and I'll tell you a funny little story that happened. So I work as a travel nurse. And one night, and I float. I either go to the ICU, step down, general floor, wherever they want to send me. Wherever they're short is where my butt goes. They need me to manage patients on drips that are intubated, I'll manage those patients. You need me to take care of grandma sick in the bed, I'll do that too. And so the doctor comes in, I'm taking care of another patient, and all of a sudden I hear my other patient, she's pre-surgery, and I hear I hear her coughing, and she's like a bedbound Hispanic woman, and I see fluid coming out of her nose, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? So it turns out that the doctor comes in to give the patient was going for a CT of the abdomen, and they wanted to give them, they had an NG tube. Yeah, I think it was, yeah. No, the patient had a peg tube. The patient had a peg tube that wasn't in use. And for some reason, the doctor picks up or disconnects, I don't know what it was, man, the patient's nasal cannula. And she's injecting the contrast through the nasal cannula, and it's going into the patient's nose, and the patient is coughing. I walk into the room and I'm like following the lines, and I'm like, what are you doing? And she was like, oh, this is not the peg. And I'm like, no, it's the nasal cannula. I was wondering why she was coughing. And I'm like, she's like, oh, please don't tell anybody. She's a fucking resident. I'm like, so I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. You telling me I can't walk into a hospital? I'd be like, shit, I'm just fine. I'll take my chances. I think I'll be better off. And then someone comes up behind her and says, I'd like to agree with you. And says, this is so stupid. And unfortunately, I can't bring myself to wish ill, even on willingly ignorant. Right? So for all you Neanderthals that haven't gone out there and fallen over each other to take it, well, you are willingly ignorant. And she goes on to say, I have no problem with that. It says, if we were lucky, we can cut off 30% of the population that votes the wrong way. Whew. Let that sink in, right? These are the people that you share a country with. These are the people that you share a government with. who are willing to allow you to die. And the mindset like this is not too far off. You know, when we look back in time and we're like, why didn't anybody say anything? We saw all those people that died under Stalin, all those people that died under Hitler, all those people that died under Mao. Pick your time period about when periods of massacres that took place where people committed crimes against humanity. And you sit here and wonder, why didn't anybody say anything? And they were like, they did. They were just willing to kill them. We've seen it in today's cancel culture where some doctors have come forward and then they get threatened. There was another doctor in Florida who was telling people to be a little cautious about taking it, and you had CNN out there with their, sir, who do you think you are telling people? And they found the guy on his bicycle. He was out there with no shirt on, right? Taking care of himself, looked shredded. And of course, they were willing to throw him under the bus. And we've seen that with numerous doctors and nurses, other individuals, other scientists who have come forward and they're like, oh, it's misinformation, it's medical misinformation. They get canceled, they get threatened, we're going to take your license away. We're going to throw you in jail. Some people get arrested. Some people get deplatformed off of social media. And so it's in this environment. It's in this environment where all morality goes out the window. And the only thing that control, you know, the Bible in the book of Revelation, it refers to peoples as seas, as the ocean. And that's basically what's happening right now. Wherever the waves move is where the politicians will push people. They'll push people in that direction. If the people call for defund the police, even though overwhelmingly it's going to lead to death, they'll be like, all right, we're going to defund the police. If people say we want, which we're going to go over, we want free money, right? Millions of Americans have signed a petition calling for $2,000 a month stimulus checks in the wake of the Delta variant. I'm afraid I can't go out there. I need you to send me money. What do you think the government is going to do? And I said this in my last video. When it's a politician that's corrupted, right? When it's a politician that's corrupted, you can pull that politician out and say, we don't need you in office anymore. But what do you do in a democracy where it's the people that are corrupt? What do the politicians do? This is why you see people look at the decisions that politicians make and they don't make any sense. But they follow wherever the whims of the sea tells them to go. It has nothing to do. That's why all these politicians, right? When you look at Kamala Harris, when she was running, she accused Joe Biden of sexual assault. And then people asked her later on, why did you join this individual? She said, oh, it's just politics, right? So they're not in the habit of telling people the truth. It's just all for the purpose of getting elected. And so in this environment, they'll just do whatever the sea of people want them to do. If they want you to go out there and commit acts of atrocities, they're just going to be like, well, this is what the people want and this is what we're going to give them. So what do politicians do? Because the people are just going to vote them out. I showed you in that last video where I talked about Greece, where Europe said cut spending and the Greek people overwhelmingly said, we're not going to cut spending. We want more free money. And then the EU said, either you cut spending or you starve. What do you do when it's the people themselves that are corrupt? And so looking, there's another article here that I came across talking about Hispanics. They're not pushing for Hispanic Latin Americans, of course, in line for this gene therapy. A lot of people sick out there. I mean, you really don't even hear about this. When I talk to people in the DR and the PR and in Colombia, you really don't hear about this. The people out there that have already moved on to what's going on. Oh, we're just going to go on. We're going to take it. It's whatever. We're going to go on with our lives. It's not like here in America where this is like the sole focus. You got so many people out of work that they ain't got shit to do except type on social media and complain about the next C-19 death. One death too many. But then when someone dies of the therapy, they're just like, oh, well, this is just what we have to do, you know, for the greater good. This is what happens. And of course, you've heard in New York, of course, moving forward today, that unless you took it and unless you can show proof and you got to show me an ID, well, you can't eat in our restaurants. You can't go. And I'm like, shit, it's time to go. That's all. That's the only thing I was waiting for. I was like, once this goes through, I'd be like, fuck it, I'm out. Time to go. Time to move. Abandon ship, right? Time to abandon ship and move on until we got to leave the country. I'm just biding my time. Just biding my time until I got to make that last plane out, like those Afghanis that are like trying to get over here to America. I'm trying to catch that last flight out of the United States. And this is what I recommend. I have recommended either you're going to live somewhere deep in the woods, away from society, or you're going to have to pick another country. This is where we are at. And this is the mentality that you have to have. You have to have the mentality of, I have to have an exit strategy. I can't be living near these people. Some people might say, well, I'm going to move to Texas, or I'm going to move to Florida or to some other red state. It will eventually come for you. It will eventually come for you. Because it's the culture. It's the culture of the people that live in this country. There's a New York City restaurant manager goes renegade, right? It was just, oh, this is the real misinformation right here. Imagining not wanting to discriminate against somebody because of whether they've taken a certain medication. We didn't do this with the flu. We didn't do this with Ebola or any other disease that's communicable. We don't do this with HIV. Shoot, in some places they say even if you give somebody HIV willingly, it's no longer really committed a crime because it's discrimination. But this is viewed as going rogue. We got business owners going rogue in the face of new vax-proof rules. It says we do not discriminate against any customer base, regardless of whether it's sex, gender, race, creed, age, whether they're poked or unpoked. It says all customers who wish to patron or welcome in our establishment. What do you think? Do you think that there will be people out here who will march for these business owners that go this route? Or do you think people will just go along to get along? People who stick their necks out like this in this culture typically get it chopped off. And that will be the unfortunate. So when people look back in history and your great-grandchildren, or when the great-grandchildren, your great-grandma's gonna be sitting there in her rocking chair talk about, when I was back in the Victorian hub, there were people who tried to talk, right? She's sitting there knitting you a pair of socks, and she's telling you about the stories of people like this, right? The people who tried to stand up, but our people did nothing. She's gonna show you on her arm, right? She's gonna show you on her arm her number, right? This is my unvaccinated number when I entered into the camp. This is what happened in the COVID camps. People think that this isn't gonna happen, but this is the environment where stuff like this takes place, because all that has to happen is an economic collapse. That's exactly what happened in Germany, where the government was forced to pay retribution, right? As a result of what had happened, the government had to pay retribution for what had been done. As a result, the Weimar government had to print money to basically pay off the debt. Very much what's going on today. And eventually what happened is they experienced hyperinflation, which could happen if all the other countries up and decide to say, you know what, we don't want to deal with the dollar anymore. And in an environment like that is where a Hitler-like individual will rise. Very similar to what happened in places like Cuba. Cuba is the aftermath. Cuba is our future. Cuba is the future of America. Venezuela is the future of the United States of America if the people don't rise up and do what needs to be done. Like what happened in Colombia. When the Colombian government said that they were going to raise taxes, the men of the nation rose up and fought back. Even though you hear people talking about, violence isn't the way, when logic and reason fail, the only answer that is left is violence.
Months of frustrations have boiled over onto the streets of Colombia's biggest cities. Violent clashes fueled by the pandemic and poverty, shortages of food and fuel. This doctor says he's fed up. We've had 27 years of terminal poverty, even among health workers, he says. We all deserve better conditions. Colombia's been devastated by COVID-19, a soaring death rate that's almost reached 3,000 in the past week, and an economy buckling under the strain of lockdowns. The working poor, especially hard hit. And now this anger, sparked by a government plan to raise taxes on many everyday items, part of a bid to rebuild the economy post-COVID. But after days of protests, the move was shelved by President Ivan Duque.
De invitar a la construcción y no al
We
odio
need
y a la
constructive
destrucción.
talk, not hatred and destruction, he pleaded. But security forces' response to the demonstrations, including military helicopters seen shooting at protesters below, has only intensified anger in the streets. At least 24 people have been killed, including a 17-year-old who kicked a police officer on a motorbike, then got shot. The United Nations and the EU have condemned the government's heavy-handed response.
We call for restraint. We call for restraint from everybody, especially from the security forces.
But Colombia's deadly mix of frustrations, a bitter reminder of years of conflict in this country, is making restraint hard to find.
Because that's what people will listen to. When you can't sit down and have a reasonable discussion about what we're not going to do and what we're not going to take, right, you get the government that you tolerate. And so why is all this happening in Australia? It's because they tolerate it. If they went out there and they marched against these people, and when the marching didn't work, they started dropping bodies, you wouldn't see stuff like this. But this is what they tolerate. So what you tolerate of in life, you get more of. It's not that difficult to understand. And so what will happen in Australia leads to be seen. These people think, well, oh, we're going to come out the other side of this and we're going to be freer. No, you're not. You're going to be even more of a slave on the back end of this. And who knows what will happen to your children and your children's children. They are the ones that are going to have this fight, or some other nation is going to have to come in and wipe out that government. Very much like what you saw going on in Afghanistan. The people in Afghanistan, the reason that you saw them able to take over the capital city in a matter of not even a day, it's because the people never assimilated. At heart, they were like, this is not who we are. We are not about this woke culture that America is trying to spread via democracy. And this is what they do. Either they'll bomb your country or they'll flood your country with dollars and try to bribe people. That's why you saw all those men. You look at the picture of the people who were fleeing. It was overwhelmingly men. Why were they leaving? It's because they knew that their heads were going to be chopped off for what they had done. They tried to bring in democracy, and of course many of these individuals were bribed. Some of the women who were pushed, they pushed womenism into these countries. So some of these women, they're like, oh, we're going to take power, we're going to be leaders in governments, and then they realize, oh shoot, the Taliban is back, and they're now going to be resubjected. It's not going to kill them because they're valuable. It's the men that they will kill. It's the men that they will put down for betraying their culture. And this is what will happen in country after country after country, years to come. Years to come. The history books will be written again about the blood that had needed to be spilt, that our forefathers refused to do, that now our grandchildren will be forced to do. This is the result. Moving on, I've always said, and I will continue to say, to pay attention to what goes on in Israel. And this was you had one of the medical executives who was being interviewed on TV about the effectiveness and what they were seeing in the hospital situation. And so it goes on to say, this is Dr. Kabi Haviv, Herzog Hospital, Jerusalem. This is 95% of the severe patients are the ones who drank the Kool-Aid. Right? It says 85 to 90% of the hospitalizations are among those who fully took the Kool-Aid. And it says the effectiveness of it is waning, fading out. And this is what I talked about months ago. That, what was it, Netanyahu had said the exact same thing, that we're not sure of. It's going to last 6 months. I think most recently they said that it starts to wane at about the 3-month mark. So for a lot of you people who were like, we're just going to get back to normal, it's like, no, you're going to be marching down the road of more therapeutic treatments. It's up to you whether you choose to continue to live that way, or whether people will actually rise up and start doing what is necessary. This is another article coming out of Israel talking about Israel scientists says it says regarding this, it says could be treated with $1 a day. It says a double-blind study shows that this medication right here, it reduces both the disease duration as well as the effective. And of course, FDA and the WHO caution against its use. But we're going to go over here to this article right here. This is an article here in New York. It says second WNY hospital ordered to treat patient with experimental drug. And this is as of February 19th, 2021. It says for the second time in recent weeks, state judge ordered a West New York hospital to use the drug right here as an experimental treatment for a patient suffering. It goes on to state that it was a 65-year-old woman who was ventilated. It says it's up in Rochester General Hospital. It says, and she was diagnosed with this. It says she has been put on a ventilator January 17th and has shown no improvement until January 20th, is when her family convinced an intensive care unit doctor to use this medication right here. It says Dickinson's attorney, Ralph C. Lugio, they basically had to go to court to get the hospital to use this. Why? Because the treatment doesn't come from the doctor. The doctor doesn't say, we're going to try this med, this med, this med. No. The treatment comes all the way from up on high, up the chain, up the chain, up the chain, eventually from your local government. The hospitals don't sit here and say, well, this medication isn't working that you keep pumping. Let's go ahead and try this one that they said that doesn't work. Let's go back to the drawing board. They say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Because just like I have a boss, you have a boss, they got a boss, etc., all the way up. And so patients don't have the choice. You can't walk into a hospital and say, yeah, I don't want that. I want this one right here. I heard something about this. I've heard some studies about this. I want this one right here. Unless you're willing to go to court and hopefully get a judge that will be on your side. It says within 12 hours, she had made a strong improvement. It says, but the hospital was reluctant to continue giving it to her. You can read the rest of the article, right? And in many other countries, this is what they've used. But you can't have an emergency use if there's a treatment. And that should be concerning for many individuals. When you see a lot of these people, oh, we're not sure what to do. This isn't the only one. I talked about another one in another video. I'll link it at the top. Talking about St. Barnabas Hospital right here in New Jersey. They had I think it was 255 patients. And they said it showed almost a 300% improvement for people who were ventilated. But that's information that you don't hear about. That's information that you gotta dig for. Like the Bible says, you gotta dig for it like you're digging for gold. And then you'll come across an article that was written on page, 40 of a 50-page news article. But the front line is make sure you take your thing. But that article with studies, with actual people who are actually sick showing improvement, those articles you don't hear about. You might hear about it from your local favorite YouTube, but it is what it is. Talked about that. And I talked about this last time, where Americans will overwhelmingly push for more free money. Millions of Americans have signed a petition calling for $2,000 a month. It's up to 3 million signatures so far. Almost 3 million. This is a petition has gained traction since May as the variant spread through the country. I said there have been 3 stimulus checks released, and it's unclear whether there will be a 4th. And people are like, we don't want a 4th. We want recurring free money. What do you think will happen to the value of the dollars for people who actually have to go out and work for them? They're going to get reduced. And in this scenario, it doesn't take long for a scenario like this to completely collapse. And people like this who are completely dependent upon the government, that's why the government is like, you need to take it, you need to show a passport, you got to show ID, you got to do all this stuff, because it all pushes the herd in the same direction. We need everybody going in this direction. We're not going to go out there and force it because we know you people have guns. And if push comes to shove and we push you too far, there's going to be an uprising and we're going to be outnumbered. But if we can just make it real difficult, right? Slowly bringing the water to a boil, then we can get the herd moving in the direction that we want. Hopefully, that's what they're hoping for. But in this scenario like this, is just complete and utter control. You lose complete freedom. You become completely dependent upon the government. That's why I said you got to have a plan. You got to have a plan. And this is the last little tidbit for people who were like, oh, maybe this isn't real. Someone else had posted. See if we can look at it right here, and you can see it says, we are writing to advise you of an important project happening in Mickleham. It says the Australian government is working with the Victorian government to build an accommodation facility. Isn't how they use such flowery words for internment camps. And it says to be used for mandatory quarantine accommodation for the duration of the pandemic. And how long is that pandemic gonna last? If the disease is able to go inside animals, then it's going to become an endemic disease, like the flu. The animals act as reservoirs for the disease. And so when it's summer months and people are out and enjoying the sun, and for the most part people don't get respiratory diseases, right? The disease hides inside the animals, and eventually it works its way back into the community. Once the colder months come on, once the cold and flu seasons come upon people, well, then they're going to, are they going to do this year after year? Are they going to put people in camps year after year? What if you actually see? Think about it. If this is what they do now, what do you think they're going to do when a real disease comes about? That's the real scary part. When these people really experience a crisis, what do you think these people are going to do?